Lily lived in a small, dusty town where the wind howled like a hungry wolf. Her dress was patched, her shoes worn thin, and her stomach often rumbled with emptiness. Her father, a once proud farmer, had fallen on hard times. The land refused to yield crops, and debt collectors circled like vultures. He was a good man, but desperation had begun to cloud his judgment. The town itself mirrored their struggles. Buildings sagged, paint peeled, and hope seemed a distant memory. The townsfolk were weary, their faces etched with the hardships of frontier life. Children played in the dirt, their laughter a fragile counterpoint to the town's overall melancholy. Lily, despite her circumstances, possessed a spirit that refused to be broken. She helped her father however she could, mending clothes, tending to their small garden, which mostly produced weeds, and trying to keep his spirits up with stories and songs. Her bright eyes held a spark of defiance, a refusal to surrender to the harsh realities of their lives. One sweltering afternoon, a stranger rode into town. He was dressed in fine clothes, a stark contrast to the townsfolk's weathered garments. His horse was a magnificent black stallion, its coat gleaming in the sun. The stranger's name was Silas, and he carried himself with an air of arrogance that made the townsfolk uneasy. He exuded wealth, but his eyes held a coldness that sent shivers down Lily's spine. Silas wasted no time in making his intentions known. He strode into the town's dusty saloon, where Lily's father was attempting to drown his sorrows. After a brief conversation, conducted in hushed tones, Silas emerged with Lily's father, his arm draped possessively around the older man's shoulders. They walked towards Lily, who was fetching water from the town well, a sense of dread washing over her as she saw the grim expressions on their faces. The air crackled with unspoken tension, a storm brewing in the heart of their small, struggling town. She knew, with a sinking feeling, that something terrible was about to happen. As Silas and her father approached, Lily's heart pounded in her chest. She clutched the water bucket tighter, the cool metal a small comfort against the rising panic. Her father's face was a mask of shame and desperation, his eyes avoiding her gaze. Silas, on the other hand, wore a smug smile, his eyes raking over Lily as if she were an object to be bought and sold. "Lily, child," her father began, his voice raspy and strained. "Mr. Silas here has made us an offer." He stumbled over the words, unable to meet her eyes. Silas stepped forward, his voice smooth and oily. "An offer that will solve all your problems, my dear. An offer that will bring you comfort and security." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "I am offering to take you as my wife." Lily gasped, the water bucket slipping from her grasp and clattering to the ground, spilling its contents into the dusty earth. "Wife?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. She looked at her father, pleading for him to deny what she was hearing. But his silence was confirmation enough. He looked away, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Silas continued, his voice dripping with false charm. "I have a fine house, Lily, with servants and all the comforts you could desire. You will never have to worry about hunger or cold again." He held out his hand, his fingers adorned with expensive rings. Lily recoiled, instinctively stepping back. She couldn't believe what was happening. Her own father, the man who had always protected her, was offering her up to this stranger. She felt a surge of anger, mixed with a profound sense of betrayal. "Father, you can't," she cried, her voice filled with desperation. "You can't do this to me." Her father finally looked at her, his eyes filled with pain. "Lily, I have no choice," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "We're starving. I can't watch you suffer anymore. This is the only way to save us." Silas smiled, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "So, do we have an agreement?" he asked, his gaze fixed on Lily. The weight of the world seemed to crash down upon her. Her father's survival, her own future, all hanging in the balance. Tears streamed down Lily's face, blurring her vision. The weight of her father's decision pressed down on her, suffocating her. She looked from her father to Silas, a silent plea for some kind of escape from this nightmare. But there was none. Her father, his face etched with a grief that mirrored her own, reached out and gently took her hand. His touch, usually a source of comfort, now felt like a brand, marking her as sold. "Lily, please understand," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm doing this for you. For us. I can't bear to see you suffer any longer." He explained, his voice cracking, how Silas had offered him a sum of money that would not only save them from starvation, but would also allow him to rebuild their farm. He spoke of new tools, fresh seeds, and the possibility of a future free from debt. It was a tempting vision, a glimmer of hope in their bleak existence. But it came at a terrible price. Lily knew her father was telling the truth. She had seen the desperation in his eyes, the growing hopelessness that threatened to consume him. She knew he believed he was doing the right thing, making the ultimate sacrifice for his daughter. But she couldn't help but feel like she was being sacrificed, offered up to a man she didn't know, a man who made her skin crawl. Silas watched their exchange with a cold detachment, his eyes devoid of any empathy. He was a businessman, and Lily was simply a commodity, a means to an end. He saw her as a possession, something to be acquired and controlled. Finally, Lily spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "And what about what I want, Father?" she asked, her eyes filled with a mixture of anger and despair. "Doesn't that matter at all?" Her father flinched, his face contorted with pain. "Of course it matters, Lily," he said, his voice trembling. "But sometimes we have to make difficult choices. Sometimes we have to sacrifice our own happiness for the greater good." He looked at her, his eyes pleading for her understanding. But Lily couldn't give it to him. Not yet. The pain was too raw, the betrayal too deep. The deal was sealed. Across the dusty street, leaning against the weathered post of the general store, stood Jebediah, a man as rugged as the landscape itself. He was a rancher, a solitary figure who preferred the company of his cattle and the vast open plains to the chatter of town. He'd seen the exchange unfold, the tension radiating off the small group like heat from a forge. Jeb had come to town for supplies, a necessary chore he usually dispatched with as quickly as possible. He wasn't one for gossip or idle conversation, but the scene he'd just witnessed had caught his attention, pricking his conscience like a stray thorn. He recognized Lily. She sometimes helped old Mrs. Henderson with her chores, a kindness Jeb had quietly observed. He watched as Silas, his face a mask of self-satisfaction, led Lily and her father towards the edge of town, where his fancy carriage awaited. Lily walked with her head bowed, her shoulders slumped in defeat. Her father shuffled beside her, his steps heavy with guilt and regret. The townsfolk watched from their doorways and windows, their faces a mixture of pity and helplessness. No one dared to interfere. Silas was a powerful man, and they were all too afraid to cross him. Jeb felt a stirring within him, a sense of unease that he couldn't ignore. He knew Silas's reputation. Rumors of his ruthless business dealings and cruel treatment of his workers had spread throughout the territory. The thought of Lily being subjected to his whims filled him with a growing anger. He knew Lily's father, too, a man who'd fallen on hard times but had always been honest and hardworking. Jeb understood the desperation that could drive a man to make such a terrible choice. He'd seen it before, the slow erosion of hope that could lead even the best of men down a dark path. Jeb pushed himself off the post, his jaw tight. He told himself it was none of his business, that he should just collect his supplies and head back to his ranch. But the image of Lily's downcast face haunted him, a silent plea for help that he couldn't ignore. The internal battle raged, mind versus heart. Silas helped Lily into the carriage, his touch lingering a moment too long, a possessive gesture that made Jeb's blood boil. Lily didn't look back, her gaze fixed on the dusty road ahead. Her father stood beside the carriage, his head bowed, a picture of utter defeat. Silas tossed him a heavy sack of coins, the clinking sound echoing in the sudden silence. Without a word, Silas climbed into the carriage, snapped the reins, and the horses lurched forward, pulling the vehicle away from the town. Lily's father watched them go, his shoulders slumped, the sack of coins heavy in his hand. He didn't move until the carriage was just a speck on the horizon, swallowed by the vastness of the plains. A few townsfolk approached him, offering words of sympathy and support. But he just shook his head, unable to speak, his heart heavy with regret. He turned and walked slowly back towards his dilapidated farm, the weight of his decision crushing him. As the carriage disappeared, Jeb finally made his decision. He couldn't stand by and watch Lily be taken away to a life of misery. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Silas was a powerful and dangerous man. But Jeb couldn't live with himself if he didn't try to help. He strode into the general store, his purpose clear. He quickly gathered his supplies, extra ammunition for his rifle, a canteen of water, and some dried meat. He paid the storekeeper, a grizzled old man who knew Jeb well enough not to ask any questions. Outside, he mounted his trusty horse, a sturdy Appaloosa named Paint. Paint pawed the ground impatiently, sensing Jeb's urgency. Jeb adjusted his hat, his eyes narrowed, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He knew he had a long and dangerous ride ahead of him. He had to catch up to Silas before it was too late. The thought of Lily's fear spurred him onward. He kicked Paint into a gallop, leaving the small town behind, a cloud of dust marking his departure. The chase had begun. Inside the carriage, Lily sat rigid, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She stared out the window, but she didn't see the passing landscape. Her mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion. Silas sat opposite her, a smug smile playing on his lips. He seemed to enjoy her discomfort, feeding off her fear like a vulture on carrion. He tried to engage her in conversation, asking her about her life in the town, her hopes and dreams. But Lily remained silent, offering only curt, monosyllabic answers. She didn't want to talk to him. She didn't want to acknowledge his presence. She just wanted to escape. Silas, growing impatient with her silence, reached out and placed his hand on hers. Lily flinched, pulling away as if she'd been burned. "Don't be afraid, my dear," he said, his voice smooth and menacing. "I will take good care of you. You will have everything you could ever want." Lily glared at him, her eyes flashing with defiance. "I don't want anything from you," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "I just want to go home." Silas chuckled, a cold, humorless sound. "Home is where I am, Lily," he said, his grip tightening on her hand. "You are mine now." Tears welled up in Lily's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. She would remain strong, even in the face of this terrifying ordeal. She looked out the window again, hoping for a miracle, for some kind of rescue. The carriage rattled on, carrying her further and further away from everything she knew and loved. The sun began to set, casting long, ominous shadows across the plains. Lily felt a growing sense of despair, a feeling that she was trapped, with no hope of escape. But deep down, a small spark of defiance remained, a refusal to give up, a belief that somehow, someday, she would find a way to reclaim her freedom. She just had to survive until then. The journey felt endless, each mile taking her further into the unknown. Jeb rode hard, Paint's hooves pounding against the dry earth. The sun beat down mercilessly, turning the plains into a shimmering oven. Sweat stung Jeb's eyes, but he didn't slow down. He had to catch up to Silas. But as the miles stretched on, doubts began to creep into his mind. What was he doing? He was a loner, a man who avoided trouble at all costs. He had his ranch, his cattle, his solitude. Why was he risking everything for a woman he barely knew? He told himself it was about justice, about doing what was right. But deep down, he knew there was more to it than that. He had noticed Lily before, her quiet strength, her kindness to others. He had seen the spark of defiance in her eyes, a spirit that reminded him of something he had lost long ago. He remembered his wife, Sarah, taken too soon by a fever. He had been powerless to save her, a memory that still haunted his dreams. He had vowed never to let himself care for anyone again, to protect himself from the pain of loss. But Lily had somehow broken through his defenses, awakening something within him that he thought was long dead. He wrestled with his conscience, torn between his desire for solitude and his growing feelings for Lily. He knew that interfering with Silas would bring trouble, danger, and possibly even death. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he had to do something. He couldn't stand by and watch Lily be taken away to a life of misery, just as he had been unable to save Sarah. He thought of Lily's face, her eyes filled with fear and despair. He imagined her trapped in Silas's clutches, her spirit slowly being crushed. The thought fueled his determination, strengthening his resolve. He wouldn't let that happen. He wouldn't let another innocent person suffer. He spurred Paint onward, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The setting sun cast long shadows before them, stretching across the plains like accusing fingers. But Jeb didn't falter. He knew he was doing the right thing, even if it meant risking everything. The lonely rancher was no longer alone in his purpose. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange, red, and purple. The temperature dropped quickly, a stark reminder of the harshness of the plains. Jeb pulled his coat tighter around him, his breath misting in the cool air. He pressed on, Paint's hooves eating up the miles. He knew Silas would likely stop for the night soon, seeking shelter and rest. Jeb hoped to catch up to him before then, but he also knew he had to be careful. He couldn't risk a direct confrontation in the dark. He needed to be strategic, to plan his approach carefully. He scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of Silas's camp. He knew Silas would choose a spot that offered some protection, a place where he could easily defend himself. Jeb had to anticipate his movements, to think like his enemy. As darkness descended, Jeb spotted a faint glow in the distance, a small campfire flickering against the blackness. His heart leaped. It had to be Silas. He slowed Paint to a walk, approaching the camp cautiously. He dismounted, tying Paint to a nearby bush. He crept forward on foot, using the shadows to conceal his movements. He could hear voices now, Silas's booming laugh and Lily's soft, barely audible responses. He peered through the bushes, getting a clear view of the camp. Silas had set up a small tent, and a fire crackled merrily in front of it. Two men, presumably Silas's hired hands, stood guard, their rifles resting on their shoulders. Lily sat by the fire, her face pale and drawn. She looked small and vulnerable, a stark contrast to Silas's imposing figure. Jeb watched them for a long time, observing their movements, studying their routines. He needed to find a weakness, an opportunity to strike. He knew he couldn't take on all three men at once. He had to be smart, to use his wits to his advantage. He knew that this was not just about strength, but also about strategy. The coming hours would be critical. He needed a plan. The night was long and silent, broken only by the crackling of the campfire and the occasional howl of a coyote in the distance. Jeb remained hidden in the shadows, his mind racing, formulating a plan. He knew he couldn't afford to make a mistake. One wrong move could cost him everything, including Lily's life. He decided to wait until the early hours of the morning, when the guards would be tired and their vigilance would be at its lowest. He would try to create a diversion, something to draw them away from the camp, leaving Silas vulnerable. As the hours ticked by, Jeb thought about Lily, about what she must be going through. He imagined her fear, her helplessness. He vowed to do everything in his power to get her out of this situation. He also thought about Sarah, his late wife. He remembered her smile, her laughter, the way she had always believed in him. He knew that Sarah would have wanted him to help Lily. She would have admired his courage, his willingness to stand up for what was right. As the first hint of dawn appeared on the horizon, Jeb knew it was time to act. He crept back to where he had left Paint, untied him, and led him to a nearby ridge overlooking the camp. He mounted Paint and rode slowly along the ridge, making sure he was visible to the guards. He then fired his rifle into the air, the sound echoing across the plains. The guards immediately reacted, grabbing their rifles and running towards the ridge, their eyes searching for the source of the gunfire. Jeb quickly turned Paint and rode away, leading the guards on a wild goose chase. He knew he couldn't outrun them forever, but he just needed to buy enough time to create a diversion. He wanted to draw them far enough away from the camp to leave Silas relatively unguarded. The gamble was enormous. Would it work? All his hopes rested on this plan. Back at the camp, Silas stirred, awakened by the sound of the gunshot. He sat up in his tent, his eyes narrowed, his senses on high alert. He knew something was wrong. He could feel it in his gut. He emerged from the tent, stretching his stiff limbs. He looked around, noticing that the guards were gone. He cursed under his breath. He had told them to stay put, to protect the camp. But they were fools, easily distracted by the sound of a gunshot. He glanced at Lily, who was still sitting by the fire, her eyes wide with fear. He could see that she was hoping for something, for someone to rescue her. He smirked. She was deluded if she thought anyone was coming to save her. "Where are your men?" Lily asked, her voice barely audible. "They've gone to investigate a disturbance," Silas replied, his eyes fixed on her. "But don't worry, they'll be back soon." Lily didn't believe him. She could sense the tension in the air, the feeling that something was about to happen. She stood up, her legs trembling, and took a step towards the edge of the camp. "Where do you think you're going?" Silas asked, his voice sharp. "I need some air," Lily said, her eyes darting around, searching for an escape route. "You're not going anywhere," Silas said, grabbing her arm and pulling her back towards the fire. "You're staying right here with me." Lily struggled against his grip, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she was in danger. She had to find a way to escape, to get away from this man. Just then, a shadow fell over the camp. Silas turned, his eyes widening in surprise. Standing before him, silhouetted against the rising sun, was Jebediah. He stood tall and resolute, his rifle held loosely in his hand. "Let her go, Silas," Jeb said, his voice calm but firm. "Silas." Silas sneered, his hand still gripping Lily's arm. "And who are you to tell me what to do?" he asked, his voice dripping with arrogance. "This woman is my property. I paid good money for her." Jeb's eyes narrowed, his gaze hardening. "She's not property, Silas," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "She's a human being, and she deserves to be treated with respect." "Respect," Silas scoffed. "Respect is for those who can afford it, and neither she nor her father can." Jeb took a step forward, his hand tightening on his rifle. "Let her go, Silas," he repeated, his voice unwavering. "This is your last chance." Silas laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You think you can scare me, rancher?" he asked. "You're just one man, and I have plenty of friends who would be happy to teach you a lesson." "Your friends aren't here, Silas," Jeb said, his eyes scanning the surrounding area. "And it's just you and me now." Lily watched the exchange with bated breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what was going to happen, but she knew that Jeb was her only hope. She prayed that he would be able to save her. Silas hesitated for a moment, his eyes flicking back and forth between Jeb and Lily. He could see the determination in Jeb's eyes, the unwavering resolve. He knew that Jeb wasn't bluffing. He finally released Lily's arm, shoving her roughly towards Jeb. "Take her," he said, his voice filled with contempt. "She's not worth the trouble." Lily stumbled forward, almost falling. Jeb reached out and steadied her, his hand gentle and reassuring. He looked at her, his eyes filled with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked. Lily nodded, unable to speak, her throat tight with emotion. She was safe, at least for now, but she knew that the danger wasn't over yet. She knew that Silas wouldn't let them go without a fight. The standoff had only just begun. Silas's apparent surrender was a ruse. As Jeb checked on Lily, Silas swiftly drew a hidden derringer from his coat. It was a desperate move, fueled by rage and humiliation. He aimed it directly at Jeb's back. Lily saw the movement and screamed, "Jeb, look out!" Jeb reacted instantly, whirling around just as Silas fired. The bullet grazed his shoulder, tearing through his coat. He stumbled slightly, but maintained his footing. He could have easily killed him, but he hesitated. He wasn't a killer. He just wanted to stop Silas, to ensure Lily's safety. He grabbed Silas's wrists, holding them tightly. "It's over, Silas," he said, his voice strained. "Just give up." Silas glared at him, his face contorted with hatred. "I'll never give up," he spat. "I'll make you pay for this, rancher." "You and that little—" Jeb cut him off, punching him hard in the jaw. Silas went limp, his eyes rolling back in his head. Jeb released him, standing up and brushing the dirt off his clothes. Lily rushed to Jeb's side, examining his shoulder. "You're hurt," she said, her voice filled with concern. "It's just a scratch," Jeb replied, trying to downplay the injury. "I'll be all right." He knew that the fight was far from over, but for now, they were safe. He had disarmed Silas and proven his resolve. Now, what to do with him? The next decisions would shape their fate. Jeb quickly assessed the situation. Silas was unconscious, but would undoubtedly recover. He couldn't just leave him there. He also couldn't simply kill him, despite what he deserved. He needed to find a way to neutralize the threat without resorting to violence. He turned to Lily. "Are you well enough to travel?" he asked, his voice gentle. Lily nodded, though her face was pale. "I think so," she said. "Good," Jeb said. "We need to get out of here. Those guards will be back soon." He quickly gathered their belongings, packing them on a paint. He then tied Silas's hands and feet with rope, securing him to a nearby tree. He made sure he wasn't too tight, but enough to keep him from escaping easily. "What are we going to do with him?" Lily asked, her eyes fixed on the bound Silas. "I'm going to leave him here," Jeb said. "He'll be found eventually, but hopefully it will be long enough for us to get away." He helped Lily onto paint, then mounted behind her. He turned the horse towards the east, away from the town and towards his ranch. He knew it was a long shot, but he hoped they could make it to his place before Silas or his men caught up with them. As they rode away, Lily leaned against Jeb, her body trembling. He put his arm around her, offering her what comfort he could. He knew that she was still terrified, but he also knew that she was strong. She had survived a terrible ordeal, and she would survive this too. They rode in silence for a long time, the only sound the steady rhythm of Payne's hooves against the ground. The sun rose higher in the sky. They rode for hours, the landscape slowly changing from flat plains to rolling hills. Jeb kept a watchful eye on the horizon, constantly scanning for any sign of pursuit. He knew it was only a matter of time before Silas's men caught up with them. As the afternoon wore on, they reached a small stream. Jeb decided to stop for a rest, allowing Paint to drink and graze. He helped Lily dismount, and they sat down beneath the shade of a large cottonwood tree. "Thank you, Jeb," Lily said, her voice sincere. "For everything you've done." Jeb smiled, his eyes meeting hers. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "I just did what I thought was right." "But you risked your life for me," Lily said. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "Just being safe is repayment enough," Jeb replied. He paused, then added, "What will you do now, Lily? Where will you go?" Lily sighed, her gaze dropping to the ground. "I don't know," she said. "I can't go back to my father. Not after what he did." "You could come to my ranch," Jeb said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "It's not much, but it's a safe place. You could stay there for as long as you need." Lily looked at him, her eyes searching his. "Are you sure?" she asked. "I don't want to be a burden." "You wouldn't be a burden," Jeb said, his voice firm. "I'd be glad to have you. It gets lonely out there sometimes." Lily smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her face. "Thank you, Jeb," she said. "I like that very much." Just then, they heard the sound of approaching horses. Jeb jumped to his feet, his hand instinctively reaching for his rifle. He knew it was Silas's men. The respite was over. The final confrontation was at hand. He helped Lily up and instructed her to stay behind him. They had to face what was coming together. 3 riders emerged from the trees, their faces grim, their rifles drawn. Jeb recognized them as Silas's hired hands, the same men who had been guarding the camp. They had clearly found Silas and were now seeking revenge. "All right, Rancher," the leader of the group yelled, his voice filled with menace. "Let the girl go, and we might just let you ride away." Jeb stood his ground, his rifle raised. "I'm not letting her go," he said, his voice steady. "She's free to make her own choices." "She doesn't have a choice," the leader sneered. "She belongs to Silas now." "She doesn't belong to anyone," Jeb retorted. "And if you want her, you'll have to come and get her." The leader exchanged glances with his men, then nodded. "All right, Rancher," he said. "You asked for it." The 3 men charged forward, firing their rifles. Jeb returned fire, quickly taking cover behind a large boulder. Lily crouched behind him, her hands clasped over her ears. The gunfight was intense and chaotic. Bullets whizzed through the air, kicking up dust and splintering trees. Jeb fired with deadly accuracy, taking down two of the riders with well-aimed shots. The leader, realizing that he was outmatched, tried to retreat. But Jeb was too quick. He emerged from behind the boulder and fired a single shot, hitting the leader in the leg. The leader cried out in pain, collapsing to the ground. Jeb approached him cautiously, his rifle trained on his head. "It's over," he said. "Just give up." The leader glared at him, his face contorted with rage. "I'll get you for this, rancher," he spat. "Silas will make you pay." "Silas isn't going to make anyone pay," Jeb said. "He's finished." He disarmed the leader and then turned his attention to the other two wounded men. He knew he couldn't just leave them there to die. He had to do what was right, even for his enemies. The final test of his character was at hand. Jeb tended to the wounded men, bandaging their injuries and making them as comfortable as possible. He knew they wouldn't be able to travel for a while, but hopefully someone would find them soon. He left them with some water and food, then turned his attention to Lily. She had watched the entire gunfight, her face pale and drawn. She was clearly shaken by the violence, but she also seemed to admire Jeb's courage and compassion. "Are you all right?" Jeb asked, his voice gentle. Lily nodded, her eyes fixed on him. "I'm all right," she said. "But what happens now?" Jeb hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to say. He knew that Lily couldn't go back to her old life, not after everything that had happened. He also knew that he couldn't force her to do anything she didn't want to do. "It's up to you, Lily," he said, his voice sincere. "You can go back to your father if you want, or you can come with me to my ranch. The choice is yours." Lily looked at him, her eyes searching his. She saw the kindness in his face, the unwavering resolve. She knew that he was a good man, a man who would always protect her. "I want to go with you, Jeb," she said, her voice firm. "I want to start a new life with you." Jeb smiled, his heart swelling with joy. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "Then let's go," he said. They mounted Paint and rode off into the sunset, leaving the violence and hardship behind them. They knew that the future was uncertain, but they also knew that they had each other. And that was enough. The possibility of a new beginning, and perhaps even love, bloomed in the western sky. Back in town, Silas was eventually found, humiliated and defeated. His reputation was shattered, his arrogance exposed for the hollow facade it was. The townsfolk, who had once feared him, now looked upon him with scorn. He packed his belongings and left town, vowing revenge, but his threats rang hollow in the face of Jeb's courage. News of Jeb's bravery spread quickly, inspiring the townsfolk. They had witnessed firsthand the power of one person to stand up for what was right, to challenge injustice and oppression. Jebediah, the solitary rancher, had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was always the possibility of redemption. Lily's father, consumed by guilt and regret, learned of his daughter's safety in Jeb's kindness. He knew he could never truly make amends for what he had done, but he resolved to dedicate his life to helping others, to repaying the debt he owed to his daughter and her rescuer. As for Jeb and Lily, they arrived at his ranch, a small but sturdy homestead nestled in the heart of the rolling hills. They began to build a new life together, a life filled with love, respect, and a shared commitment to justice. Lily brought warmth and laughter to Jeb's solitary existence, filling his days with joy and companionship. Jeb, in turn, provided Lily with security and protection, offering her a safe haven from the harsh realities of the world. They worked side by side, tending to the cattle, planting crops, and building a future together. They learned to rely on each other, to support each other, and to love each other. And as they rode off into the sunset each evening, their hearts filled with gratitude and hope, they knew that they had found something truly special, a love that had been forged in the fires of adversity, a love that would last a lifetime. They built a life together, one filled with happiness and the peace of knowing they were exactly where they were meant to be. The end.